We continue with our Discernment of Spirits Mondays. And last time we began to talk about Rule 7, which is about spiritual desolation, a time for resistance. And we began to also explore how the rule begins kind of with St. Ignatius inviting us to think in a certain way. So this rule is not so much about kind of an action, but a way of thinking, right? And one of the things that we began to unpack from the rule is to consider, right, our moment of desolation as a trial, and how this gives some meaning to the experience, right? Something that the Lord is allowing, a trial, as opposed to, just kind of meaningless, desolation. Now, just to back up a little bit, so this particular rule is not for any trial. Like, maybe you could lose your job and that's really difficult, or you're experiencing sickness and that's really difficult. But this rule is not just for any trial. This is for the specific trial of spiritual desolation, right? These rules can apply to spiritual desolation. So this sense of experiencing God being far away, right? So Ignatius invites us, if we are experiencing not just any trial, because again, one could lose one's job and it's hard, but God may not seem far necessarily. But it's this experience of God being kind of far, a certain malaise, right, spiritual darkness, confusion, then this rule applies. And so we consider, hey, I'm experiencing this thing, the Lord is allowing it, it's a trial, but He's allowing it, right? And then the other things that I didn't unpack in the rule is that St. Ignatius invites us to think of the nature of this trial. The nature of the trial is basically just what desolation is, that I do not feel God, but God is there, right? That is the nature of desolation, that you don't feel, right, God, but that He is there, right? And so as you experience desolation, you realize, hey, I'm experiencing a trial. God is allowing this. What is the nature of the trial I'm experiencing? It's desolation, which means, yeah, Lord, you feel far away, where you are not far away. The last thing that Ignatius invites us to consider is that the purpose of this, right? And Ignatius in the rule that we read last week says that the purpose has to do with growth, an opportunity to resist, right, and grow. Maybe the analogy that comes to mind for me is when you think of somebody who's learning to ride a bicycle, like a kid, right? I remember learning, and after they took off the training wheels, I still needed some help, and so my dad would hold like the back seat of the bike, right? And then would kind of go with me for a little bit, and then he would let go, right? So as you kind of follow this analogy of the Lord is so often just holding like the seat of our spiritual bicycle, if you will, but He wants us to grow and be able to kind of just do some things, right, without Him holding the bike. And so He may let go of the bike, but He doesn't go anywhere. He's right by our side, right, for if we're going to fall or something like that, right? And the purpose why He lets go is because He wants us to be able to actually ride the bike, right, as opposed to Him kind of riding it for us, if you will. The analogy is not perfect. There's some issues with the analogy, but maybe it gives you an idea. Like, He doesn't leave, He's just right there, but right, just like you don't feel your dad's hand holding the seat, so you don't feel Him right there. Now, Ignatius gives us a lot of assurances in this rule regarding the fact that even though we don't feel God's help, His help is there and we can fight. So he says, just to finish, I'll just read you part of the rule regarding this great hope. He says, he can resist with the divine help, which always remains with him, though he does not clearly feel it, right? We can always resist with the divine help because it always remains with us, even though we cannot clearly feel it. For the Lord has taken away from him His great fervor, abundant love, and intense grace, leaving him, however, sufficient grace for eternal salvation, right? There's a sense of the Lord withdrawing some of these feelings, right? But He stays there, right? The divine help is still there, and there's sufficient grace for eternal salvation, right? And so this is rule 7, a time for assistance that has to do with a mode of thinking about my situation that helps me persevere and resist.